For nearly 2,000 years, the Book of Revelation has been treated as Western culture's ultimate enigma, a terrifying cinematic blueprint for the literal end of planet Earth. We read it, and our minds immediately jump to the horizon of our own future: nuclear warfare, global tracking networks, totalitarian dictators, and cosmic disasters. But what if this modern framework gets the entire book backward? What if the Apocalypse of John was never meant to be a crystal ball looking into the 21st century? What if it was actually a high-stakes, hyper-localized piece of political resistance literature? A coded emergency broadcast written in a specific first-century dialect of apocalyptic imagery, designed to save a targeted group of people from a literal extermination. Today, we are stripping away centuries of speculative theology to uncover the layered composition theory of Revelation. We are going to first look at the explosive historical evidence that suggests the core of this book was first written in early 60s AD as an urgent survival manual. We will then examine the seams, referred to as stitching by scholars, which describe distinct messages compiled into one. Then we will trace how that vindicated survival text was repurposed and repackaged during a later date to be sent across Asia Minor as a manifesto of hope for a dying church. To understand the circumstances that birthed the Book of Revelation, we must travel back to early 60s AD. We will look through the eyes of a man who watched the events unfold firsthand. His birth name was Yosef ben Matityahu, later known to history as Flavius Josephus. Josephus was not a Christian. He was a Jewish aristocrat. He was both a descendant of the Jewish high priesthood and the Hasmonean monarchy, and became a military commander during the Great Jewish Revolt of 66 AD. After losing at the siege of Jotapata, he surrendered himself to the Romans, ingratiated himself with General Vespasian, and spent the remainder of the war standing directly behind the Roman siege lines, acting as translator, messenger, and eyewitness to the events soon to unfold. His speeches across the wall garnered both sympathy from moderates and hatred from zealots. Josephus recounts his experience in his eponymous historical series, The Jewish War. While making no attempt to vindicate Christian prophecy, his clinical secular account read almost as a literal transcript of John's apocalypse. His description of events, stripped of theological traditions, has become an indispensable historical resource for historians and scholars alike. Consider Revelations 1:7. Behold, he cometh with clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him. In the opening chapter of Revelation, John drops a line that has traditionally been read as a distant, global event at the end of human history. Readers expect a literal, physical figure of Jesus floating over modern-day cities. But even within the verse, this theological interpretation falters. How can those which pierced him possibly see his return 2,000 years later if they've already died? First-century historical records reveal a shocking alternative. Josephus records the cosmic event in May of 66 AD that parallels this exact scripture. Right before the beginning of the Jewish revolt, he says, "I suppose the account of it would seem to be a fable. Before sunsetting, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running about among the clouds and surrounding of cities." Independent of Josephus's account in The Jewish War, the pagan Roman historian Tacitus corroborates the exact same phenomenon in his own historical records, histories. Armies were seen to fight in the sky, and the glitter of their arms flashed from the burning clouds. To the first-century church, the text of Revelation chapter 1 verse 7 wasn't a futuristic mystery. It was a visible event that unfolded right before their very eyes. Josephus describes multiple other supernatural omens preceding the war. Examples include a year-long sword-shaped star appearing over Jerusalem, a blinding light in the temple altar during midday, a sacrificial cow giving birth to a lamb, and temple gate swinging open at midnight. An earthquake and heavenly host of voices from within the temple saying, "We are leaving hence." A prophet who spoke, "Woe to Jerusalem," for 7 years before finally adding, "And woe to me," moments before he was killed by catapult-thrown stone. Rather than heed the supernatural warnings, however, Jewish zealots erupted with violence. They charged into multiple Gentile towns and villages, raiding, murdering, and pillaging, inviting the wrath of Rome and surrounding nations to quell the revolution. When Rome responded, Jewish zealots retreated into Jerusalem, murdered the high priests, shut the doors, and held captive Jerusalem's citizens. Josephus then describes a Jerusalem that did not fall to an external enemy. It devoured itself from within. He describes the division of Jerusalem into 3 zealot-led factions, a literal division of Jerusalem into 3, paralleling Revelation chapter 16, verse 19. In a fit of fanatical violence, these factions burned Jerusalem's massive centralized storehouses of grain, supplies meant to sustain the city for years. He then describes a famine that defined the limits of human comprehension. It was during this famine that the majority of Jerusalem's citizens perished, including Josephus's own wife and children. He pleaded for months across the wall for the Zealots to see reason and release its captives, but his pleas were met with mockery, rocks, and arrows. Josephus describes with horror witnessing the citizens search the sewer systems for dung to chew on after they ran out of food. He documents an account of Mary of Bethzubah, a wealthy woman driven insane by starvation, who roasted her own infant and offered the other half to zealots when they knocked on the door. After months of mockery and projectiles thrown at him, Josephus was finally knocked unconscious by a rock thrown by zealots. While his companions dragged him back to the camp, the zealots celebrated his death. Josephus later returned to give one final speech across the wall, stating that their fates has been sealed. For profaning the temple, murdering Jerusalem's citizens, and ignoring the offers of mercy, the zealots had brought the wrath of God upon themselves. What would come next would be upon their own heads. Shortly after, the armies of Rome breached the Antonian fortress. When the legions broke through in 70 AD, they slaughtered the zealots and any citizens that got in the way. Between famine and the following slaughter, Josephus records a number of over 1 million perishing inside the walls. Historians prefer a more conservative estimate that Tacitus gives of 600,000 killed or captured. Interestingly, 600,000 was a highly symbolic figure in ancient Israel. It was the number of men listed escaping Egypt in Exodus chapter 12, verse 37. Ancient Judean scholars of the time treated this number as the number of a civilization's beginning, and poetically, this number also marked the number of the civilization's end. According to Josephus's description, the entirety of Jerusalem, along with the temple, was burned down to the ground. The gold on the temple melted, running down into the crevices of the stones. Roman soldiers systematically destroyed every single block apart to extract the melted gold, leaving not one stone left upon another, paralleling the prophetic vision by Jesus in Matthew chapter 24, verse 2, less than a generation earlier. Josephus writes, "The soldiers only paused their arsenic campaign when the blood from the slaughtered kept putting out the fires." By the next morning, Jerusalem had become a smoldering pile of ash. Paralleling the prophecy in Revelation chapter 14, verses 20, which starts in the city and extends to the rest of Judea. While a darkened sun and falling stars are a common metaphor in Old Testament literature for a fallen nation, if you were a human being standing in Judea in 70 AD, you were not necessarily watching a metaphor. The sun was choked out by black ash. The moon turned blood red over the Dead Sea. You were witnessing the absolute, literal, physical end of your world. But while hundreds of thousands perished within Jerusalem's walls and the regions beyond, historical records reveal something equally astonishing. The early Christian community of Jerusalem was absent in the chaos. They didn't die in the siege, and they didn't join the Zealot rebellion. How did an entire religious movement step out of the path of the greatest military empire on earth just before the trap snapped shut? Josephus records the moment of the mass exodus. After this calamity had befallen Cestius, many of the most eminent of the Jews swam away from the city as from a ship when it was going to sink. 4th-century church historian Eusebius of Caesarea, drawing on much older 1st-century records, discusses in more detail the events surrounding these Christians. He writes, "The people of the church in Jerusalem were commanded by an oracle, given by revelation to approved men there before the war, to leave the city and dwell in a certain town of Perea called Pella." Pella was a Gentile city tucked safely into the foothills of the Decapolis across the Jordan River. It was geographically and geopolitically insulated from the Jewish revolt. In 66 AD, Roman general Cestius Gallus had Jerusalem completely surrounded. Then, for no logical military reason, he inexplicably withdrew his forces. To the Zealots, it looked like victory on the horizon as they pursued the fleeing forces. But to the Christians, this bizarre military pause matched the prophecy recorded in Luke chapter 21, verse 20. "And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out. And let not them that are in the countries enter therein too. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled." Jesus also said that it would happen inside a single generation. In Luke 21, verse 32, "Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass away till all be fulfilled." Less than a biblical generation, or 40 years, after this prophecy, the Roman siege of Jerusalem had begun. Having heard this prophecy, the Jewish Christians did as the prophets told them. They dropped everything, turned their backs on Jerusalem, and fled towards the mountains region of Perea. The cosmic accounts of Revelation 7 and 12 bear a striking resemblance to these literal descriptions given by historians. After the 6th seal is unleashed in Revelations, John records there will be a pause in judgment for a moment to give the Christians a chance to escape before a 7th seal is unlatched. Revelation 7:1. "And after these things I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels, to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, Hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads." Revelation 12 describes this real-world, gritty, historical flight in cosmic imagery. John writes of a woman clothed with the sun, standing on the moon, bearing a child. The historic community of faith bringing forth the Messiah as a great red dragon stands ready to devour the child. But the child is caught up to God's throne. Let's examine what happens to the community left on earth. "And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days. 1,260 days is equal to 3.5 years or 42 months, the precise measurement of time in Revelation chapter 11, verse 2. It is given over to the nations, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. 42 months was the amount of time from Nero commissioning Vespasian to sack Jerusalem to its ultimate downfall. John's text continues. And the dragon poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river which the dragon poured out of his mouth. The Roman army swept through Judea like a physical flood, destroying every village in its path. But the geological landscape of the Jordan Valley and the mountains of Pella helped the woman. The Christian community was physically hidden in the deep ravines of the wilderness, entirely preserved while the old world of Jerusalem was ground into gray dust. When we examine Revelation through this historical window of time, other confusing symbols and imagery seem to drop their masks. They aren't futuristic, indecipherable mysteries. They were contemporary political realities, written in a code understood by Jerusalem Christians. Let's decode some of the primary targets. The seven-headed beast. In Revelation chapter 17, verse 9, John explicitly tells the readers that the seven heads of the beast are 7 hills on which the woman sits. Every single citizen in the Greco-Roman Empire knew exactly what that meant. Rome was universally famous in poetry, literature, and legal documents as the Urbs Septicolis, the city of 7 hills. The number of the beast. In Revelation chapter 13, verse 18, it says, "Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That number is 666. In the times of Revelation, letters doubled as numbers and were used interchangeably in a practice called isopsophy or gematria. For example, when archaeologists excavated the ruins of Pompeii, destroyed in 79 AD, they found a famous piece of Greek graffiti scratched into the plaster. It reads, "I love the woman whose number is 545. Of course, Nero's name in Greek was too well known to Roman soldiers, so John had to use the Hebrew gematria for the calculation instead. If you take the Greek name of Nero Caesar and translate it using the Hebrew alphabet instead of the Greek, the numeric values of the letters are Nun, 50, plus Resh, 200, plus Vav, 6, plus Nun, 50, plus Kof, 100, plus Samek, 60, plus Resh, 200. The mathematical sum is exactly 666. Even more compelling evidence to support Nero's name being the name of the beast. Ancient Latin manuscripts of Revelation listed the number as 616 instead of 666. Why? Because the Latin version of Nero's name dropped the final N, reducing the total by exactly 50. The variant Latin manuscripts cemented the interpretation of the beast's identity being Nero to its Latin readers. The Whore of Babylon. Many later theologians have associated Babylon the Whore to be the Roman Empire. However, the whore is described as riding on the beast who was earlier established as Rome. If Revelation 17 verse 16 states, "The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked," then the whore must be something else. After looking at the internal markers and parallels to historical record, decoding is easy. "Come out of her, my people," in 18:4, parallels the record of the Jerusalem Christians' escape to Pella from Jerusalem, and Jesus' warning in Matthew 24:16 to "Those in Judea flee to the mountains." It fits records and context of the early church leaving Jerusalem before its destruction. Drunk with the blood of God's holy people in 18:6. Many prophets who were killed were not killed in foreign lands, but in Jerusalem. Jesus was killed in Jerusalem. The apostles and early church were persecuted in Jerusalem. Jesus affirms this position in Matthew chapter 23, verse 37. "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children together, as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. Revelation 18:20 says about the whore, "Rejoice over her, you heavens! Rejoice, you people of God! Rejoice, apostles and prophets, for God has judged her with the judgment she imposed on you." Revelation 18:3 says, "For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies." The Sadducees had become extremely wealthy off their corrupt trade practices, bending the intent of Jewish law to their benefit. The temple had become a major central bank and hub of commerce for merchants. The Zealot movement in Jerusalem, in fact, began as a movement against their own corrupt Sadducees rather than Rome. This isn't the first time God called Israel whore or prostitute. It was a common term from prophets all over the Hebrew Bible. Often God compares Israel to a prostitute, an adulteress, a whore, for participating in pagan worship. "And there were voices and thunders and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake. And the great city was divided into 3 parts." Revelation chapter 16, verses 18 and 19. Josephus records a violent storm with heavy rain, constant lightning, thunder, and a great earthquake occurring the same time the Zealots and their allies stormed the temple, slaughtered the priesthood, and took complete control of Jerusalem. The Zealots then divided Jerusalem into 3 Zealot factions. The kings of Revelation chapter 17, verse 10. They are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is, the other has not yet come, and when he does come, he must remain only a little while. No better time suits this description than after Nero's death in 68 AD. The Roman Empire started with Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero. After Nero killed himself, Rome fell into collapse. The coffers were empty, revolts started, leaders were assassinated. Vespasian arguably became the 6th king after a short struggle for the throne. Vespasian revived a fractured Rome, restocking its coffers, paralleling Revelation 13:3's revival of the beast after the mortal wound. While his son became emperor after him, his reign was only 2 years before the 8th emperor, Domitian. The beast that was and is not. It is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7. Revelation 17:11. Eventually, when Domitian came to power, he later became known as the Second Coming of Nero by the Church. He enforced the tax to Roman god Jupiter more strictly than others before him, which early Christians considered idolatry and aligned with the warning of taking the mark of the beast. Mark of the beast. Revelation chapter 13, verse 17. "And that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name." During Domitian, true economic participation in the Roman world required participating in trade guilds, civic festivals, and oaths that required pagan sacrifices. Refusing to participate made elite business or political standing nearly impossible, a reality heavily mirrored in the historical background of the book of Revelation. Under Roman law, if a Christian was taken to court for not sacrificing to Roman gods and refused to recant their faith and offer a sacrifice, they would be tortured, executed, and their family stripped of all its wealth. While the practice of execution was not widespread during Domitian, if a Christian held any position of power economically or politically during this time, they would be accused by political or economic rivals for not participating in Roman sacrifice, making participation in the economic system difficult. The currency bared the image of the current emperor, whether Nero, Vespasian, or Domitian, established earlier as the heads of the beast. 14:9. "And the 3rd angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand. Babylon the whore, as we established earlier as Jerusalem, fell in 70 AD. Interestingly, the timing of this verse occurs immediately after the fall of Babylon in 14:8 and parallels quite fittingly with the fiscus Judaicus, or Jewish tax, implemented by Vespasian in 71 AD. The 10 horns. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. Revelation chapter 17, verse 13. During the siege of Jerusalem, multiple independent governments lent auxiliary soldiers to the Roman Empire to support Rome in its destruction of Jerusalem. Revelation 17:16. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. At the start of the revolt, Jewish zealots launched raids into neighboring territories, attacking villages, estates, and cities, murdering and pillaging the land to get resources for their movement. They murdered the surrendered Roman soldiers after vowing to release them, upsetting both Rome and surrounding nations, and fueling their hatred and support for Rome in their campaign against Jewish zealots. Josephus notes these auxiliary units fought with an uncontrollable fury and bloodlust against Jerusalem. They literally brought her to ruin, stripped the city naked by plundering its wealth, and ultimately burned her with fire when they torched the temple and the entire upper city. The 144,000. Finally, who are the mysterious 144,000? For generations, modern prophecy charts have painted them as a futuristic army of Jewish evangelists appearing at the end of human history. But when you examine the precise internal criteria John lays out, a far more grounded, historical identity emerges. This isn't a futuristic mystery. The 144,000 are the exact Jewish Christian refugees who fled Jerusalem and escaped to the mountain city of Pella. Let's see the internal markers in Revelation as to why this is. John says that this group is selected exclusively from among the 12 tribes of Israel. This isn't a global Gentile church. It is a highly specific, localized Jewish remnant. John calls them the firstfruits of God and the Lamb in Revelation chapter 14, verse 4. In the first century, firstfruits referred to the very first harvest. The literal firstfruits of the Christian movement were not 21st century believers. They were the original Christian church of Jerusalem. John inserts the sealing of the 144,000 in chapter 7, between the breaking of the 6th and 7th seals. When the Roman general Cestius Gallus inexplicably paused his siege of Jerusalem in 66 AD, he fulfilled this gap and provided the exact window the Christians needed to escape before the final seals of doom were broken. John defines their character by stating they are virgins who did not defile themselves. Mainstream readers often get tripped up here, taking this literally. But in both the Old and New Testaments, virginity was a standard prophetic idiom used to describe spiritual purity, the refusal to participate in political idolatry and pagan compromises. They also refused to join the violent rebellion. There is one final defining argument that bridges the Old and New Testaments. Throughout the Hebrew prophets, the day of the Lord follows a consistent pattern. Judgment will fall upon Jerusalem, but God preserves a faithful remnant. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Joel, Amos, Micah, and Zephaniah all repeat this promise. Jesus and Paul apply that same remnant to their own generation. Paul writes that at the present time there is a remnant chosen by grace, while Jesus speaks of a faithful flock preserved through coming tribulation. Ezekiel chapter 9, verse 4 directly references God's mark preserving a group before judgment on Jerusalem. Then Revelation opens with the same prophetic pattern. Before judgment begins, God seals 144,000 from the 12 tribes of Israel, preserving them from his wrath to come. So then, if this apocalypse was fundamentally a localized warning system Why do we still have it today? Why wasn't it thrown away into the dustbin of history after the year 70 AD? This is where the theory of text stitching becomes relevant. But we'll save that for part 2. Make sure to hit the bell to get notified.